Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's episode of Geography of Hope, presented by Alaska Wilderness League. For those of you that might be new to this series, my name is Monica Scheer. I'm the director here at the League. I'm coming to you tonight from southeastern Pennsylvania, the traditional territories of the Lenape peoples. And as always, I am thrilled to see so many of you have joined us for tonight's event around the recently released film, Newtok. Tonight's event also happens to fall on a momentous date for us here at the League as we mark the 1-year anniversary of the passing of Adam Colton, our beloved former executive director, who was also a loving husband, devoted father, and truly loyal friend. Adam led the League with grace, humility, and purpose, as well as a strength and energy that permeated not just throughout the organization, but the entire conservation community. It's that energy that we hold on to today as we continue to fight for wild Alaska. And I can think of little better ways to celebrate and remember Adam than through a geography of hope, as he both loved these events and was an advocate for the power of storytelling. When we first pitched the idea of these virtual events in the early days of the pandemic, Adam was all in from the beginning. And I can also clearly recall his cringe when we threw out our first idea for a name for the series, Virtual Zoom with Alaska Wilderness League Friends. Okay, I mean, maybe it wasn't that bad, but it certainly wasn't great. Within minutes, we had received an email that said, "What do you think about Geography of Hope?" You know, from Will Stenger's letter of 1960. None of us knew what letter Adam was referring to, but what we did know is, again, he had managed to capture exactly what we had been aiming for. So I found Adam's remarks from our first Geography of Hope nearly 2 years ago, on May 7th, 2020, and wanted to read them quickly to both celebrate Adam's way with words and also remind us all, now 2 years in, what our original idea behind these programs were. Just 3 days before the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge was established in 1960, Wallace Stenger wrote his famous Wilderness Letter, arguing that wild places have value beyond recreation, are fundamental to what has helped shape our national character and identity. Stenger asserted that something will have gone out of us as a people if we ever let the remaining wilderness be destroyed, ultimately concluding that leaving vast expanses of the natural world intact represents a kind of geography of hope. We at Alaska Wilderness League wanted to launch this special Geography of Hope series because this very moment of challenge, crisis, hardship, and despair can also be a time to be hopeful. What kind of world do we want to build together as we look beyond the pandemic and think about recovery? Can we envision a society that sees itself not as separate and apart from the natural world, but deeply connected to it? Could this be a pivotal moment when we finally take action to address the climate and biodiversity crises and forever safeguard some of the last remaining truly wild, intact ecosystems on Earth? We hope this series offers each of you a chance to at least virtually experience some of those very landscapes in Alaska. We hope you will be inspired by our speakers, who include award-winning filmmakers, authors, photographers, artists, and Indigenous leaders. We hope you will leave with a greater sense of community, not only as part of Alaska Wilderness League's extended family, but as among a very special group who are committed to and passionate about ensuring that we never let these remaining wildernesses be destroyed. Indeed, we hope you will leave these virtual experiences reinvigorated to act in defense of wild Alaska, of it, the rights of its Indigenous people, and the sanctity of their sacred lands, for the vast herd of free roaming wildlife, and for what Alaska's landscapes represent, a true geography of hope. Thank you for indulging me on that. And as I mentioned, tonight, we will be covering one of Adam's truly favorite ways in which he can inspire, and that was through storytelling. And that brings us to tonight's film, Newtok. A few very quick housekeeping items. to help you get the most from your time here tonight. As you can see, all participants will be muted for the duration of the program to help assure everyone has the best listening experience possible. I will be having a conversation with our panelists, and we've allowed plenty of time to field questions. So please type your questions in at any point during the evening into the chat. We can work them in during our panel discussion and have time for Q&A at the end of our program. If for any reason you miss part of tonight's program or want to listen again, it is being recorded. We will be sending a link of the full recording in a follow-up email that you'll receive tomorrow. Again, with the film, you may have seen in your registration email, there was an opportunity as the filmmakers were gracious enough to provide a link for all registered participants to view the film ahead of time. If you haven't had a chance, no worries, the link will be live through tomorrow, and tonight's conversation, I'm sure, will just serve to act as more inspiration. Tonight's program is centered around Newtok, Alaska, a village which water will erase. Built on a delta at the edge of the Bering Sea, the tiny Yupik village has been dealing with melting permafrost, river erosion, and decaying infrastructure for decades. To keep their culture and community intact, the 360 Yupik residents must relocate their entire village to stable ground upriver while facing a federal government that has failed to take appropriate action to combat climate change. In moving their village, they will become some of America's first 21st century climate refugees. This is a film of a village seeking justice in the face of climate disaster. And with that, I am so very pleased to welcome our featured speakers tonight. Della, who grew up and lived in Newtok until she left home to pursue a university education. She studied in Fairbanks and spent portions of her adult life in other Alaskan cities and towns before returning to the village. And joined by Michael Kirby-Smith and Andrew Burton, the documentary filmmakers and photojournalists who have covered conflict, protests, natural disasters, and presidential campaigns, and whose work has been honored by the Pulitzer Prize, the Sundance Institute, the Photographer of the Year International, amongst others. In 2016, Burton and Smith set out to make a film that showed the impact of climate change on an American community in real time. They logged nearly 300 days in Newtok, Alaska, until production ended in 2020. In the coming years, they hope to continue supporting Newtok's efforts to complete its move through the body of photography and reporting they've completed during the creation of this film. And with that, I would like to welcome our panelists, and I will turn it over first to Della to say a few words about herself. Oh, let me make you a co-host and make sure you're able to unmute yourself. See if that works.
Hello, I'm Della. I live in Matarvik with my family. Am I supposed to turn it over to Mike?
Yep, that's fine. Yeah, and then I'll let Mike speak here. Let me make you, there we go.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Kirby-Smith. I'm here in Brooklyn, New York, in Lenape territories, and just wanted to say thank you for having us here, and we're really excited to have a discussion, and thanks a lot. I'll kick it over to Andrew now. Thanks.
Hi, thanks so much for having us. I'm one of the co-directors. My name's Andrew Burton, and I'm calling in from Seattle, which is unceded Duwamish territory. And we're really excited to be here.
Well, yes, and thank you for all of you for joining. In order to really set the stage for tonight's conversation, and knowing it's maybe not everyone had the chance to view the film in its entirety, we are going to be showing the trailer. So I wanted to take a minute and give you, Andrew and Michael, an opportunity to just give us a little summary of the film and kind of tee up the trailer.
Sure. Gosh, where to begin? Our film follows a portion of Newtok, Alaska's efforts to relocate. Newtok's story is a long and complex and complicated story, but at the root of the whole thing it's pretty basic. The town has been affected by melting permafrost and river erosion and intensifying flooding for decades. They voted to relocate in 1996. They were granted new land by Congress in 2003, but they were never granted any money or funding or support to relocate. And so since they voted to relocate in 1996, they have been trying to find the money to move their village as this river sweeps into town. We first read about Newtok in 2013, so decades after they had already chosen to relocate. And we started filming in 2015, and we filmed for 5 years from 2015 through 2020. I guess I won't try and give away the ending of the film, but I think that's a good sort of summary to cue up the trailer.
Perfect. Yep. Okay, bear with me 1 second here, and we will do the trailer so that everyone can see.
I had a dream last night. The land is sinking or the water is rising.
We lost about 16 feet in 4 days.
What we're doing, the remarkable aspect of this, we are building a village in the middle of a disaster. Newtok is scheduled for destruction because of climate change.
I've been here over 60 years.
I am scared for my kids. I am scared for my kids.
We rely on our ancestral hunting grounds. This is how it's always been.
It did start to feel real for me is when I was watching our land get washed away.
You can see the water from his window. I mean, just looking down like that. It's about maybe 15 feet away.
You know how to swim?
So maybe tomorrow we'll cut power. Man, it's just so hard to swallow.
There are many people who argue that this village, Newtok, should be allowed to be destroyed.
I'm not ready to leave.
Yeah, you're making a history.
Tide is coming in.
Thank you for that amazing trailer and the context leading up to it. And with that, I'd like to invite Della. I'm so glad you were able to join us today as someone who is featured prominently in the film and as a Newtok resident experienced all of this to share a little bit more about your story.
Hi, I just wanted to read the story I wrote. Hi, my name is Della. I'm from a very small village that's being washed away. I'm from Newtok. My village is 400 miles from the nearest road system. You can only reach it by boat or by plane. Where I come from, the wind blows every day. In the winter, you see miles and miles of absolute white nothingness. The sky blends into the land and the wind chill can get down to -70 below zero. When I walk to work in that cold, I curse all the way there and all the way home. In the summer, Newtok is nothing but green. The air is my favorite because it is so clean. It smells almost sweet like wet earth. The sun will set, but it stays bright. There's no darkness. You can see for miles all day and all night. I love the warmth of the sun on my skin and how everyone is outside together. In the summer, there is life everywhere on the tundra. Everyone is hunting for birds or moose, fishing for salmon, pike, or halibut, or picking berries. Everything and everyone has come alive. When I go berry picking with my children, we go for hours until our fingers turn a purpley blue. We fill 5-gallon buckets with crowberries, nangoon berries, blueberries, and salmon berries. There's a season for each one. We eat as we pick, and some days the majority ends up in our stomachs, and we laugh all day. Some people think we are just surviving out here where we are, but we are living. We live off the land. We live with the sea. This is our way. In our hearts, we are still a nomadic people, no longer able to roam. My grandpa was so in tune with the land. He always wanted to be out there where his soul belonged. His way of life was taken from him when the government mandated education of our children in one place. Our culture has suffered many losses. When I think about where I'm from, I think about family, and I might think about family differently than you do. To me, family is my whole village. Family is connection and culture and tradition all wrapped into one. Everyone looks out for one another. We watch each other, that each person is okay, and we share whatever we have. It's harsh where we live. Everyone is struggling in some way. Our small community has suffered darkness, poverty, depression, and addiction. We've suffered great trauma, and yet we are a joyous people. We are happy to be out here. When I was a young mother of 2 children, there was a deep misunderstanding in my family, and I had no place to go. My grandmother took me in. She let me live with her, no questions asked. She made me feel treasured, that she was so happy to have me, to stay as long as I wanted, as long as I needed. She showed me how family is everything. I remember her telling me that trauma will either tear our family apart or pull us together. We would sit and drink coffee together at her table by the kitchen window. Her house was close to the river. We would talk about family and life. One time I was in deep pain sitting with her. I remember her bright blue eyes shined as she looked at me and said, "Love is always the answer." Our village, my grandmother's loving home was the second home to be torn down in Newtok because it is so close to the river. I watched it as they demolished it. Our village is being washed away because of climate change. To lose a place, a way of life, is to lose yourself. I experienced this once before when I had to leave Mukhtagvik with my children. I understand what it is to lose what you are. I remember flying away from Mukhtagvik and watching the village get smaller and smaller in the window. The further away we flew, the heavier my heart. I saw it on my children's faces. They didn't have words for this heaviness yet. When we arrived in Fairbanks, I paid close attention to my daughter, a tender soul like me. Watching her go to school, live in this town, and try to make friends away from her culture, her people, I watched spark leave her eyes. I could look at her face and see the people she missed. I could see the longing for our family stuck to her whole body. I didn't ever want to leave Mukhtagvik, but I had to. I tried to stay happy and hopeful for my children, but we were devastated. I will never forget the day we returned. Flying home was like watching their brightness return. The excitement on their faces grew as their eyes watched out the window. When our plane touched down, they saw their cousins walking toward the airport. They ran full speed for one another and jumped into each other's arms. They cried happy tears, and I knew they belonged together. We all did. The documentary Newtok I'm in, I didn't want to be a part of. I hid from the camera crew and stood behind my tall cousin and told him to pretend I wasn't there. He thought it was hilarious and immediately pointed me out. I didn't want to be a part of it, thinking, why would I want to expose myself? I went along with it after thinking for a while and realizing that we could show what's happening to my village, my family. I chose to do it because I saw in my dad's frustration. In the film, you can see my dad begging a legislator to help us, only to be laughed at. When told about the sea swallowing our shore, he made a joke asking if we could swim. Our lives are not a joke. Part of why we asked the government for funding is because they were the ones that placed us there in the 1950s, forcing us to leave our way of life. We didn't put ourselves there, and we didn't put ourselves here. My family, my culture, my people matter more to me than anything. We carry trauma in our blood, but we also carry beauty. We carry our identity, our traditions we have lived for hundreds of years. We are a resilient people, but our way of life has constantly been threatened, and we shouldn't have to be as resilient as we are. Chances are you are not from a village like me. It's possible your entire way of life has never been threatened. And yet I know that like me, you too have family you love more than anything. I know like me, you care about what happens to the places and people you love. I know we are more alike than we are different. I hope this film fills you with enough compassion to share what you've seen. I hope it gives you a greater understanding of the world, that it makes you grateful for what you have, and that you don't turn an eye from what's being lost. Climate change is happening to our planet. It is happening to me and my people, and it is happening right now. I want you to share the film, to speak of us, to speak of this place. Our move isn't complete. Our village is still split. We don't have the funding to reunite our village, our way of life. The more people that know what is happening, the more people who care, the more the government has to pay attention. We have only ever lived off the land, our culture attacked and stripped, forced to move, and our nomadic way taken. And we need you to care now. I need you to speak, to act. I need you to help save my family. You might think it's only 400 people, but these 400 people are my family. Our culture is all we have, and we need your help to save it. I want us to prove my grandmother right. I want love to be the answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Della. That was amazing, and I really appreciate you sharing so much, not only right now, but also on the film. I would have done exactly as you did and ran and hid behind absolutely the tallest person, but knowing that, you know, folks like you are out there and willing to help share your story does make such a difference in getting the word out to folks like myself and others, and probably Andrew and Michael as well, which is why I wanted to kind of turn it over to you guys and ask how you first learned about this issue of Newtok and what kind of interested you in the sense of you really saw a perspective there to make an impact with a film such as this.
Yeah, we first read about first of all, our backgrounds are as journalists. We both went to journalism school, and we have worked in various journalism media outlets for a long time. And you're sort of always looking for important stories that are going untold. And climate change and global warming is a very important issue to us. And we felt like when we started this film almost 10 years ago, the sort of common media narrative around climate change was overly simplistic and kind of trite. It seemed like most stories were sort of about the climate change was something, it was a serious issue, but it was going to happen to future generations. It wasn't here yet. We still had time to act. And that wasn't the case. And Newtok proved that. We we're doing research on how climate change was already affecting people, and we specifically wanted it. We were looking for stories about climate change affecting U.S. citizens because we wanted to tell a story that spoke to our fellow U.S. citizens, saying that this is here happening in our country. You can't ignore this. And that led us to Newtok. And so we first read about it in 2013, and we first went up there in 2015. I'm sorry, I don't actually even remember the original question. Did I answer the original question?
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of when you first learned about it and what really inspired you to follow it through. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple notes to that. I mean, I think we were really looking to try to find a story that was emotionally driven, that was unfolding in real time, a story that we could kind of immerse ourselves into and just let the story unfold. And Newtok was kind of fit all of the criteria for what we originally set out to make. And then as we started to, go down the reporting process, which included numerous interviews that didn't make the film, state, federal officials, journalists, scholars, philosophers, anthropologists, to really learn more about the backstory of Newtok. We realized that the injustice had stretched back even further than the story that we intended to tell began. And that was an angle of this story that we had never seen captured, and we became more interested in that. So it kind of evolved into a bigger, I don't want to say obligation is probably too strong of obligation to kind of try to tell the story and give as much context, not just to the climate change component, but also to the village history and how Newtok was established.
Thank you. And that actually ties, I just saw a question come up. Thank you everyone for your questions. We'll try and work them out. It ties really nice to one that was just made in a point of the film that really hit strongly with myself, and I see obviously with others, is looking beyond this move that is being forced by climate change, but going back even further, as you mentioned, Michael, onto the why and why this is here, and the point being made. And Della, you included this in your story, so thank you, that you did not, you were placed there by federal government during the process of statehood and all of that. And so this village, this Newtok village that was, placed there by entities other than the residents, who now are forced to move, but then looking at places like New Orleans and southern Florida that are facing similar climate crises, but often not with this underlying issue of choice. They had the choice. Oftentimes it's, the film mentioned maybe second homes, vacation homes. But that was a point that was made clear through the interviews that Della, your community did not want to make. You did not want to go down this route of saying us, our situation versus this situation. And it's, I think, stated in the film how you really did all make this conscious choice to approach your issue very differently, and with some of your grandmother with the love and a view of compassion. And so I was just curious if you wanted to speak anything to that, how you guys kind of approach all your meetings and talking about this when you don't have this kind of finger pointing that would be very easy to do, as many of us, I think, feel we would want to do.
Was there a question to that?
No, I know, I apologize. How did your community come to the sense that it really wanted to, when they were talking to others about this issue, come at it from a place of love and compassion, and not one of anger and finger pointing?
I don't really know the process of how and why and where, but I do know there are stories of how we became a village and why, when, I guess, when the government wanted children to be educated. So that's when I think it was BIA that chose where we were going to move to or permanently stay at. And they chose where Newtok is right now. And that's how that's how it became a village. I'm not sure.
No, that's, yeah, no, that's wonderful. And Andrew or Michael, if in your interviews, if you found anything kind of along that sentiment that you included in the film.
I think Mike Walry kind of spoke to that a little bit. I mean, I think there was the village council expressed that they didn't want to relitigate the problems of the past, and that they wanted to think about moving forward and being as constructive as they can, and to work with as many people as they can to continue to forge ahead. That was a conscious decision that the council made. And because I think that, you know, there is, from a litigating standpoint, there are things that you could pull from the past and use, but I don't think that they wanted to go, I don't think they wanted to look back. They wanted to look forward, or at least that was what the mandate that they gave Mike, who is the elected lawyer for the village council.
Perfect, thank you. And I wanted to touch, before we moved on to kind of my next question, there were a few that Della, your story brought up, and I think it's just giving those of us, as you mentioned, we did not grow up or have experience being in a village, and so just if you wanted to share a little bit more. Obviously your village has internet as you're joining us tonight. I know Facebook was referenced in the movie, healthcare. So if you just wanted to share maybe some things that maybe would surprise those of us that don't know the village, but we would find familiar, like internet or radio.
Well, in the new village over here, we have roads now, kind of like gravel roads, and no longer boardwalks, which is nice. And that's all I can say.
I did mention in a school, because you are joining us, you're a kindergarten teacher who just graciously agreed to join us after wrapping up a, I'm sure, exhausting day with the kiddos. But there are similarities, and I think that's always eye-opening, and appreciated the film showing those as well, and not just trying to highlight some of the most unique features, but also those that bring us together and help identify ourselves and so many others. And were you, Andrew or Michael, were you at all surprised by anything you found when working in the village?
I mean, Newtok's full of modern American citizens, just like the rest of us. There are a few things that will catch you off guard, like Della was just mentioning. There are no roads to Newtok. You can't drive in, you can't drive out. There are no cars. But the village has had internet for years. You know, we don't really touch on this very explicitly in the film, but there's no running water in a vast majority of the homes. There's only running water at the school. So to get water, you go to the town water tower and you collect water in 5-gallon jugs. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, coming from a lower 48 sort of white Western perspective, there might be any number of things that surprise you about Newtok, but pretty quickly, once you talk to people, you realize that, you know, their teenagers are just are on TikTok just like every other teenager. And Della, your daughters are pretty into TikTok right now, actually. Yeah. And I would just briefly add that for Michael and I, it was really important that we not paint the citizens of Newtok into any one box, that we show the community as it is. They hunt and fish and gather berries and roots and vegetables, and a majority of their food comes from what they gather off the land. That is not the case in the lower 48. But at the exact same time, they all have cell phones and PlayStations and Xboxes, and they're very similar to life in the lower 48.
Yeah, just to
Right.
pick back that a little bit, I think it was a very, you know, a creative decision. We kind of had conversations about, you know, similarities, and making sure that we kind of tried to find a balance between the, you know, showing social media or different, you know, video games or things of that nature, and that we didn't editorialize that stuff, because it's very easy as a filmmaker to exclude that stuff. And we felt it was important to include that because, you know, it really speaks to kind of the pull between modernity and, you know, more traditional subsistence life, which I think is, is kind of where the community's at this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really did appreciate that aspect to the film, which actually leads really nice into the next topic I wanted to be sure to cover, which is in representation, and especially in film projects. For anyone who's on tonight that joined us a few weeks ago, we had a really great conversation with Princess that really touched on this issue of representation in storytelling and in filmmaking. And I know that was a particularly like initial pillar for you guys and how you approach this project. And in reading through the materials, there was a line which I jotted down when you were talking kind of about your commitment to all of this that really hit me. And you said the community didn't need this story to be told in order to relocate their village. This was not something you were coming out as a way to run into the rescue. That was not needed, and that was not the point. So I wanted to make sure to give you guys an opportunity to really talk about how you approached this project with an eye towards representation and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a long and complex topic that we are more than happy to talk about. First of all, we want to acknowledge the centuries-long history of white Western culture coming in and traumatizing indigenous cultures, including through journalism and through extractive storytelling. And that was a constant conversation that Michael and I were having, and we were trying to be always transparent and aware of. And I also want to say that we were not static, and this process was a 6-year process. We grew, we learned, we became more aware and changed our storytelling through the process as well. Ultimately, where we landed with this film is we hope that this film feels like a collaboration with the village, and that the community members helped tell their own story. We were constantly explaining what we were hoping to do to the community, inviting them to film on their cell phones anything that they would want included in the film. Some of that makes it into the movie. We tried to open and close the film with poetry written by a local poet who lives in Newtok. Her name is Martha Kasaili. We tried to include the people in the film, including Della, in the edit process and having conversations with them. And one of the biggest things for us was bringing in a Yupik producer. Her name is Marie Mead. She's an amazing woman. It's unfortunate she can't be here tonight. She's a professor at the University of Alaska, where she teaches Yupik culture. She's in the Alaskan Hall of Fame as a Yupik culture bearer. She came out to the village and did all the interviews with the community members in Yupik, and then oversaw all the translations. She also led an advisory board that we had that was made up of members of the community, Marie, a local journalist who covered Newtok extensively, a Yupik philosopher, a member of the Smithsonian's Arctic Studies exhibit or center. So we hope that this film feels not like two white guys just coming in and telling the story the way we think it should be told, but we hope it is a story that was shaped by the people of Newtok, including their words in their own language, and that it feels like a collaboration. And then just briefly, I would note that, without giving away the sort of the ending of the film for those who haven't seen it, Newtok's story is far from complete. Della was talking about this in her presentation. We feel very committed to continuing to work on documenting Newtok's relocation and working with the community to help publicize their story, because as you said, Monica, the people of Newtok don't need this story to be told, but people around the world need to hear Newtok's story. So.
I didn't know if you wanted to add anything, Michael. No worries. If not, just want to give you an opportunity.
No, I mean, I think that, I think most of what I would say is pretty much exactly what Andrew said. I mean, I think that one thing that I would say is, when we set out to make this film, it was a very long journey. This was a very long process for us. And where we started in terms of our perspective of this story and what we were able to see, not just from our perspective, but because we didn't have the inroads into the community that we built over years and, tons of time in the community. And I think that, Andrew spoke about this, about, the story is not stagnant, and we as journalists aren't stagnant as well. We're opening up to the story. We're learning more. We're talking to people. We're eating with people. We're learning. And then you think about people like Marie Mead, who is such a teacher to Andrew and I through the process of making this. And, this story unfolds in really unexpected and really amazing ways that you could never predict. And I think, Andrew and I really wanted to be open to that process. And we wanted to be open from the beginning of that process, where if we, to be vulnerable to ask the wrong questions, to be vulnerable to potentially say the wrong thing, but to learn from that and to listen was really important. And I think, we grew from this experience, and we became more aware of how the culture works, and really grew from that. I think that is how we ultimately landed on the edit that we did, which we tried to, craft in a way that the structure was in the spirit of oral storytelling traditions. So yeah, that would be my added note.
Thank you. As someone that has seen their fair share of documentaries over the years, particularly on different aspects of Alaska, I found your approach both refreshing, but also authentic, to the sense where I felt extraordinarily committed to being an active participant, which I think hopefully for film is, something that you hope to achieve, or is a reflection of success on your parts. And I'm seeing there's a number of comments. I don't want to read them all, but they're so in support of the work and the way the work was done, and Della, your story as well. So Andrew, thanks for your comment about he found "Where will we be?" A quote that was particularly memorable in what it captured, and not only looking for a place to live, but that place being a place to exist and a place to be more than just living, which I agree with. Knowing our group and the work that we've also often engaged our membership on has a lot of focus on the federal government and federal advocacy. As you guys mentioned, you were in recording a lot of meetings with various government officials, agency officials, members of Congress. We've seen some references to that really awful engagement where former Congressman Young, late Congressman Young, really seemed to poke light at the effort. So knowing what a long process engaging with the federal government is, and often an extraordinarily frustrating process, was there anything that you guys experienced in those films that kind of would give you a little bit of hope for working with the government? As you said, this is one village out of many that need funding, or lessons learned possibly that you observed?
Well, I mean, the hope that we live on is sort of the tenacity of the village council and their 20-year struggle and not giving up. The village council is 7 members of the community. They hired 1 relocation specialist and they hired 1 lawyer. So in total, you're talking about 9 people trying to navigate the bureaucracies of the federal and state government, and really not having anywhere, not knowing how to do that. And their kind of optimism and David and Goliath tenacity to continue to do that, I find very hopeful. I will briefly add that we were forced to simplify an incredibly complex story with dozens of state and federal agencies. Broadly speaking, I think it is fair and reasonable to be critical of those agencies, given that the village has not moved yet or has not completed their relocation. However, the village council is very, very praiseworthy of certain agencies over others, and certain agencies being far more willing to help, sticking their necks out, kind of giving grant funding maybe where it stretches the definition of what the grant is supposed to go to. There are definitely agencies that have stepped up and tried to help this village more than others. And so if we were going to sort of, and I'm not going to get into which agencies, but there are definitely agencies that are more stepping forward and sticking their necks out on behalf of the village. And we would just love to see more of the federal government doing that for Newtok and other communities like Newtok.
I think also there are people within all of those agencies that are advocating, but whether they have the ability to sway the agency that they're a part of, or whether there's something bigger politically that's happening, is a different conversation. The reason why I point that out is because there are people that have good intentions and are trying. But like Andrew spoke about, this is something that the federal government climate change in general has not been addressed. Adaptation, mitigation. I mean, at least when I say that, I mean on the scale that it needs to be. And so there are people that I think are trying, but I think in order to move institutions, it really takes not just one advocate, but one advocate that can rally, other advocates, and that can create momentum for change. And I think that that's where kind of outside pressure really starts to play a factor. I do think people were doing, and I think the council would say specifically who those people were, who was advocating, who I don't think they would say who wasn't advocating, but there were people fighting and continuing to fight. But as Andrew mentioned, unfortunately, the village hasn't moved. So the only people to really hold accountable are the institutions that hold the purse strings to the relocation effort.
Yeah, and it is a process when there's a system in place and a history on an issue. When there's not, as you mentioned, Michael, when they haven't even begun to address these really big issues and have their policies and procedures really nailed out, I can't even imagine. But you know, perseverance, take the time. There's always good people, often willing to help. We just often need more. But I feel the frustration that kind of comes along with having to work in the constraints of that system that essentially created this issue in the first place. But federal government aside, as I mentioned at the beginning, before we wrap up, and I'm going to toss it to my colleague that will let everyone know how you can use your voice to get engaged, and then we'll have a little bit more time for additional Q&As. But as I mentioned in my opening remarks, you know, we were very intentional when naming this program Geography of Hope, and through the pandemic, it was important to us, and I think really continuing on as we all continue to do work to improve ourselves and in the areas around us and our communities, often hearing and grappling with big questions like climate change can make it very difficult to see opportunities of hope. So I just wanted to give all of you, if you want a chance to say something that you are hopeful for about the future. And maybe Michael, since you're already off mute, I'll let you go first if that's not.
Okay. I mean, I think that, you know, I mean, it's tough to really sum that. That's a tough question. We get that question a lot. It's, I mean, I think about, I personally find a lot of hope when I see people being empathetic to other people. And what I mean by that is where people are really, you know, through emotion, we can connect to story. We connect through story, you know, powerful stories. We connect emotionally through that. And I think that that's a great driver for action in a very small, tangible way. It kind of like allows you to take a step forward without feeling this kind of existential weight of kind of what we're up against, especially when we're talking about climate change and the earth. So I personally find a lot of hope in seeing people kind of rise up, seeing empathy and seeing similarities in people. And then I think the other thing is just having hope that the younger generation, there's so much more activity that we're seeing from younger generations and activism that's very exciting. And that brings a lot of hope to me, that they're going to demand more in a way that's going to demand in numbers and with conviction and intention in place. That gives me a lot of hope. And spending time with the community, actually, their fight gave me hope. This tiny community that is gonna move this village. I believe they will move this village.
Della, we've heard from us a lot. I'd be curious what brings you hope right now, and especially given that you've lived through this, what brings you hope?
Hope right now for me is, since I'm here, I know my other part of family who are in Newtok is moving here. And it's nice to know that there are people out there that are working so hard to find funding to move the rest of the village. And knowing that we are here, it's possible, and there's no stopping us.
Well, thank you. With that, I'm going to wrap up our presentation part. Just stick around. Thank you for the Q&As. I will come back to our panels here in just a few minutes. I did want to take an opportunity. I'm very excited to say that tonight we are also joined by our new executive director, Dr. Peter Windsor, who began in mid-March here at the League as our new executive director. Welcome, Peter. I just want to give you an opportunity to acknowledge, say hi, welcome, and let you say a few words.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you, Della, Michael, and Andrew, and for everyone for joining. This is really a pivotal timing for us at AWL, and we're pleased to have you all engaged. I'd like to say thank you to you, Della. I know it's difficult to share and be open and vulnerable, and I know it takes a lot of energy out of you to do that, and it's I just very much appreciate your personal account of and fighting for your village and your culture and your lifestyle. So I'm thank you very much. It means a lot to me personally. I live in Fairbanks, Alaska. I've been here for almost 15 years, and I grew up in Scandinavia, very well connected to nature and my own people back home in Scandinavia. But being in Fairbanks for a decade and a half, I feel more Alaskan and sourdough more than anything else. And once you lived here a long time, it's very hard to imagine living anywhere else. And thank you to Michael and Andrew too for bringing this issue to the forefront. And I love seeing 110 people on this call being both educated and being engaged. I think there's a ripple effect that can happen from people getting knowledge about village life in Alaska, about the direct implications of climate change on people, cultures, and it's a totally untold or undertold story. Usually when I'm a climate scientist and we talk about climate, we talk about sea ice loss and we talk about climate models and CO2 emissions and all this technical stuff, but it really comes down to the impact of people, ecosystems, and the ecosystem services that these people rely on. So this is real stuff. I have a dry cabin here in Fairbanks that I live in without running water too. I hold 5-gallon jugs as well. And my cabin is tilting now because the permafrost that it sits on is melting underneath my cabin. So if you're gonna walk around in there, it gets a little exciting. So these are, it's not just up along the coast where Della and her extended family and village lives, but climate change is everywhere on Earth. And unfortunately, Alaska is one of the poster childs, and we're actually heating up 4 times the global average at the moment. So we all see the changes here. If you're a coastal community and you live where Della lives or along the Churchill-Beaufort coast, some of these areas are losing 20 meters of coastline a year. And it's absolutely a disaster. So I just want to say thank you, and it's good to see everyone on here, and especially Della. I hope to see you in person sometime. If you come by Fairbanks, please give me a call and we'll go out for a coffee. I'd love to meet you. So thank you everyone so much.
Thank you, Peter. And I will say thank you, Cam, because you have teed up our next part exactly, asking what we can do as individuals to help the people of Newtok. So with that, absolutely, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Chris, who's going to tell you exactly how to do that. And I will say again, all of this will be included in the will be held tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks all. I'm just going to continue to reiterate my thanks for just being a part of this and bringing this story to us. It's incredibly powerful and moving, and a few of you have asked how to get involved. Our friends at Patagonia have put together this call to action, which we're very pleased to share with you. And so I know a lot of us can't be too far away from our phones right now, hopefully. And so this is a good opportunity to pick it up and text a number for a good call for a good cause, and help to demand some justice for Newtok, Alaska. This is an opportunity for you to be personally engaged in this effort to take action directly. Like Monica said, we'll share this resource as well as for those who maybe drop off or came in late. We'll have a full recording of the conversation for tomorrow. But today, right now, you can pull up your phone, text Newtok to 71333, and take direct action to help make this possible. There you go, Monica. I also wanted to share, Monica shared a great story at the outset of our late director, Adam Colton. For those who were familiar with him or not, we also wanted to just make sure that folks were aware of the continued efforts that we've established in remembrance of his leadership. One is a fund that was established shortly following his passing. That's a board designated fund that helps support our direct work. It also helped kickstart an effort that we are launching later this summer, a storytelling grant award to help promote future stories like this one that we heard tonight. We're excited to be able to roll out a very inclusive application process, and we're trying to be thoughtful about that endeavor. There's a little bit of information on our site directly there. In the follow-up information, you'll also get my contact information. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I very much look forward to sharing some more information as we have that available. That's all my time. I know there's a lot of questions, so we want to make sure that we can get to some of those. And thank you again for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Chris. So the first question, and I'll scroll through the chat to make sure I catch the others, is for you, Della, from our friend Kent. I know you mentioned you are in the new village and you still have half your family in the old village. Kent was wondering if you could describe, I know you mentioned now you have some roads, some gravel roads, what some of the other differences or what your new village is like.
Okay. Oh. Yeah, so the new village here is not slushy and not very wet like Newtok. We feel safer here. We have a wonderful school here for our children. It's a evacuation center that we're using temporarily until our new school is built. I feel like the water's cleaner. We still have to pack it, but it's so much. I love the water here. What else? That's all I can think of off the top of my head.
No, that's perfect. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And then Michael and Andrew, there were a number of questions. I'm going to kind of loop them into one, just being cognizant of time here. When everyone was talking about hope, a few references to kind of this next generation and the young and the youth really taking up leadership. So just wanted to kind of give you guys an opportunity to talk about working with both, you know, the village council, but also some of the younger members in the village and what you really took away from that experience.
The question is what we learned from working with the youth in Newtok.
Yeah, and how you found, as you mentioned, like just getting some inspiration from them, but what?
Yeah, you know, I don't know if this answers your question, but it sort of is where my mind leads. We wanted to include children extensively in the film to demonstrate the hope and the resiliency of Newtok kids and sort of the unbridled joy that they had in their childhoods, or they have in their childhoods in Newtok. It is just an amazing childhood that we witnessed, of riding bikes and swimming and snowball fights and mud wars in the fall, and also learning viscerally, deeply early in their life how to live off the land by going berry picking with your parents or having your dad take you duck hunting. And we didn't include it in the film, but it was not at all uncommon to see, you know, 8-year-olds or 10-year-olds with shotguns over their shoulders walking off into the tundra to go bird hunting with their buddies. It's a rich and wonderful childhood that we really wanted to communicate in the film, both to bring levity and hope to the film, but also to show that this is what is at stake, and building a new village is really for these future generations. But we were constantly wondering, like, how are these kids being affected at sort of a more nascent background noise psychological level, are they being impacted? How aware are they of what their village is facing down? And we only included one scene in the film that really demonstrates this, but there are many. Well, that's not true. We included more than one, but that scene with the kid where he says, he turns to his buddies after playing around and he says, I wish you were a wizard. I wish you could make all of this go away. I mean, this is deeply, deeply impacting the psyche of the children in Newtok. You look at Della, you should speak to this. Della's daughter, Fallon, and the anxiety that Fallon was feeling, Della, when you were thinking about leaving, or when you left town rather, but when you were grappling with that. Yeah, I know that doesn't really answer your question, but it's just these topics were constantly at the forefront of our minds and our conversations and how to tell this story.
Yeah, I think just to add a little bit more, kind of more in the vein of what Andrew is just saying, themes of education and teaching and knowledge that is passed on and what we learn by looking back at kids who play the way maybe you played, or some sort of emotion that you can connect to and see a kid riding a bike and remember days when you rode a bike freely. These were themes that were really important. They were themes that we were experiencing as we were making the film and witnessing. We were seeing elders, open community meetings, community gatherings, and tell stories, part wisdom, and the youth absorbing that. And I think that it was important for us to continually try to create an immersive environment where the viewer hopefully felt, and recognized what's at stake here, which is our children, honestly. And as we spent tons of time in the school, because we slept in the school, we would go into classrooms and participate in different activities. A lot of the classes that were being taught were traditional Yupik classes, as well as climate change classes, which was very inspiring. So just constant learning and teaching.
No, that's great. And as you both mentioned, a big part of that, and especially what the kids are able to experience and something that's taught, is the hunting and the gathering, which Della, you mentioned. And so there was one last question, I do promise, from an audience member that was wondering if you are still able to and have access to the necessary kind of hunting and gathering areas with the new village location.
Luckily, we live where it's familiar for us. It does make it a little harder to hunt for like seals, so we have to wait a little bit longer than those that are in Newtok. But otherwise, hunting and fishing and bear picking have still kind of stayed the same. But when the ice breaks up or when it freezes, when we're waiting for it to freeze, we just have to wait a little bit longer for that until like the ice flows out or the ice is thick enough so we can travel across. Otherwise, it's by air.
Wonderful. And then before I wrap up, Della, any final words or anything else you wanted to say?
I just want to thank you all for listening.
And Leah just wrote in the chat and probably sums up better than I could. She says, Della, thank you so much to you and your family for sharing so much of your lives with us. Your family was really the heart of the movie. I agree. And to Michael and Andrew for taking on this project and approaching this project so thoroughly and being able to share this with us, not only tonight, we really appreciated your insight and your thoughts, but moving forward. And so I just really wanted to extend my deepest thank yous. Della, Andrew, Michael, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I had a lovely time sharing your story with all of our members. And I encourage everyone, take that action, get involved, stay involved, and keep an eye out for the email tomorrow so that you can share this with your friends and be part of the movement. And with that, thank you so much, guys. We hope to
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.